The Moonfall kingdom slept beneath a curtain of rain. Silver drops slid down ancient stone walls. Torches hissed softly as water touched their flames. The wind moved through the narrow palace corridors, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant pine forests. High above the city, the royal palace stood against the storm like a silent guardian. Inside those walls, decisions were made every day that shaped the lives of thousands. Most people would never hear those conversations. Most people would never know how kingdoms truly worked. But on this night, one overheard promise would change everything. Elara moved quietly through the eastern corridor of the palace. A leather folder rested against her chest. Inside were healing reports she had spent days preparing for the royal council. Lists of injured workers, medicine shortages, requests for winter supplies in remote villages. Important information. At least, important to the people suffering from those problems. To the nobles, they were probably just another stack of papers. Elara sighed softly and continued walking. She had spent most of her life serving others, healing wounds, delivering medicine, helping people who could offer nothing in return. It was work she loved. But sometimes she wondered if anyone even noticed. Not that she expected praise. She never had. Still, it would have been nice to feel seen. Ahead of her stood the massive doors leading to the council chamber. Golden light spilled from the narrow gap beneath them. Voices drifted through the opening. Elara slowed her steps. Normally she would knock immediately. Instead, something made her hesitate. A familiar voice reached her ears. Serena. Her older sister. Beautiful. Ambitious. Confident in ways Elara had never been. Since childhood, Serena had always walked into a room expecting attention. And somehow, she always received it. Elara stopped near the doorway. She wasn't trying to listen. Not at first. Then another voice spoke. Steady. Powerful enough to command an entire kingdom. Alpha King Kael. The ruler of Moonfall. The most feared Alpha in the Northern Territories. Elara had spoken to him only a handful of times over the years. Always about patience. Always about work. Nothing personal. Nothing memorable. Inside the chamber, Serena laughed softly. The sound echoed through the doorway. Then it is settled. A brief silence followed. Then Kael answered. It is necessary. His voice remained calm. Controlled. As though every word had already been measured before being spoken. The territories are unstable. Your family's support will secure peace across the eastern border. Elara frowned slightly. Political negotiations. Nothing unusual. She should leave. She knew she should. Yet her feet refused to move. Inside the chamber, Serena spoke again. And afterward. Another pause. Then Kael gave his answer. When the conflict ends, you will receive the Luna crown. Everything inside Elara went still. The storm outside seemed to vanish. The corridor disappeared. Even her own breathing felt distant. The Luna crown. The future queen of Moonfall. Serena. Not because Kael loved her. Not because fate had chosen her. Because she was useful. Because her family controlled territory the kingdom needed. Political arrangement. Nothing more. Yet somehow the words hurt. Not because Elara wanted the crown. She never had. Not because she loved Kael. She barely knew him. The pain came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere she had spent years trying to ignore. In that moment, she understood exactly where she stood in the kingdom. Invisible. Useful. Forgettable. She thought of all the nights spent caring for wounded soldiers while nobles attended celebrations. She thought of every village she had visited during disease outbreaks. Every child she had helped. Every life she had tried to save. None of it mattered in rooms like this. People like Serena shaped history. People like Elara cleaned up the damage afterward. The realization settled heavily in her chest. Inside the council chamber, discussions continued. Territory maps. Trade agreements. Future plans. Elara heard none of it. She quietly stepped backward. One step. Then another. Before anyone could notice her standing there. Before anyone could see the disappointment she could not quite hide. Turning away, she walked down the corridor. Not quickly, not dramatically, just quietly, as if disappearing was something she had practiced her entire life. A few minutes later, she emerged from the palace gates. Cold rain immediately touched her face. The marketplace below looked almost abandoned. Most vendors had already closed their stalls because of the storm. The few remaining merchants hurried to protect their goods. Thunder rolled across the mountains beyond the city walls. Elara pulled her cloak tighter. Then she heard another sound. The sound of chains. Heavy iron chains dragging against wood. Her head turned. A convoy of transport wagons entered the city through the western gate. Guards rode beside them. Slave traders. The sight immediately made her stomach tighten. Most citizens looked away whenever the traders arrived. Some pretended not to notice. Others convinced themselves it was legal and therefore acceptable. Elara had never been able to do either. The wagons rolled slowly through the rain. Behind iron bars sat dozens of captives. Women, old men, teenagers, children. Far too many children. One little girl caught Elara's attention. She couldn't have been older than 6 years old. Rain soaked her tangled hair. Her thin hands gripped the bars tightly. Fear filled her wide eyes. Then she noticed Elara standing nearby. Slowly, carefully, she reached one small hand through the iron bars. Water! The voice was barely more than a whisper. One word. That was all. Yet it struck Elara harder than anything she had heard inside the palace. A nearby guard stepped forward immediately. Move along, healer. Elara ignored him. The child was trembling, cold, exhausted, terrified. She reached into her satchel and removed a water flask. The guard grabbed her wrist. Orders! Elara looked directly at him. For several seconds neither spoke. Then she asked quietly, "What crime did she commit?" The guard's expression changed. No answer came. Because there wasn't one. The child had committed no crime. She was simply powerless. After a long moment, the guard released her wrist. Elara handed the flask through the bars. The little girl drank desperately. When she finished, she wrapped both hands around Elara's fingers. For a few brief seconds the world seemed to stop. The storm continued. The wagons continued moving. But that tiny hand refused to let go. Then the child smiled. Small smile. Fragile. Hopeful. Heartbreaking. The convoy finally moved forward. The little girl disappeared into the darkness. The smile vanished behind iron bars. Elara remained standing in the rain long after the wagons were gone. Far above, palace windows glowed warmly against the storm. Inside those walls, nobles discussed crowns and alliances. Outside those walls, children lived in chains. Something shifted inside her then. Quiet promise. A promise she made to herself. She would not forget those children. No matter what the law said. No matter who approved it. And as thunder rolled across the sky above Moonfall, Elara had no idea that this promise would soon place her on a path that would change the kingdom forever. The following night, sleep refused to come. Elara lay awake in her small room above the healer's hall, staring at the wooden ceiling while rain tapped softly against the window. Again and again, she saw the little girl from the wagon. The frightened eyes. The trembling hands. The desperate way she had asked for water. Most people would have forgotten by now. Moonfall had grown used to suffering hidden behind laws and official seals. But Elara couldn't forget. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined dozens of children sitting alone in darkness beneath the city, waiting, afraid, wondering if anyone cared. Just before midnight she finally sat up. Her decision was already made. If nobody else would look, she would. If nobody else would care, she would. Wrapping a dark cloak around her shoulders, Elara quietly slipped into the sleeping streets of Moonfall. The city felt different at night. Shadows stretched between stone buildings. Torches flickered along empty roads. The distant sound of wolves echoed from the mountains beyond the walls. Few people knew where the slave traders kept their captives before transport. Elara knew. As a healer, she had seen records, official reports, injury requests, supply lists. The holding chambers existed beneath an old government warehouse near the Western District, hidden in plain sight, protected by powerful names. The thought made her stomach tighten. She reached the warehouse shortly after midnight. 2 guards stood outside the entrance. Neither paid much attention when she approached. A healer carrying medicine was hardly suspicious. One guard barely looked up. More treatment requests. Elara nodded. The guard grunted and stepped aside. The ease of it disturbed her. No secrecy. No effort to hide what happened below. Because nobody expected anyone to question it. Taking a lantern from the wall, Elara descended the stone staircase leading underground. The air grew colder with every step. Dampness clung to the walls. The smell reached her before the chambers came into view. Rust, dirty water, fear. Then she reached the bottom. Her breath caught instantly. Rows of iron cages stretched through the underground corridor. Dozens of them. Some crowded with prisoners. Others holding only a few captives. Children sat beside strangers. Families had been separated. Faces reflected exhaustion and hopelessness. No one spoke loudly. Most stared silently at the floor. As if hope itself had become dangerous. Elara's chest tightened painfully. This was worse than she had imagined. Far worse. She moved carefully between the cages. A young boy coughed violently from one corner. His forehead burned with fever. Elara immediately knelt beside him. "It's all right," she whispered. The child flinched at first. Then slowly relaxed as she prepared medicine. The simple act of helping felt painfully small against so much suffering. Yet she continued. One patient after another. One injury after another. Doing what she could. Then something caught her attention. Near the end of the corridor sat 2 boys. Identical. Twins. Perhaps 10 years old. Unlike the others, they weren't crying. They weren't sleeping. They weren't begging guards for mercy. They simply watched. Silent. Observant. Careful. Between them sat a younger child who looked no older than 4. The smaller boy slept peacefully against one twin's shoulder. Protected. As safe as anyone could be in a prison. The sight immediately stood out. Most children trapped here looked frightened. These 2 looked focused. Almost disciplined. Elara approached slowly. The twins followed her movements with unusual awareness. "Are either of you injured?" she asked gently. One shook his head. "No." His voice surprised her. Controlled. Not the voice of a frightened child. The second twin tilted his head slightly. "You're the healer." Elara blinked. "How do you know that?" The boy pointed toward her satchel. "Herbs." Then he pointed toward her hands. "They smell like medicine." For a moment, Elara simply stared. Most adults wouldn't have noticed such details. These boys did. Interesting. Very interesting. She crouched beside the cage. "What are your names?" The twins exchanged a brief glance. Neither answered. The silence stretched. Finally one boy spoke. "Names can be dangerous." The answer sent a chill through her. Children weren't supposed to talk that way. Children weren't supposed to understand danger so well. Life had clearly taught these boys lessons no child should learn. Elara reached through the bars and handed them food. The first twin accepted it politely. Without hesitation. He immediately shared half with the younger child sleeping beside him. Again unusual. Again different. The more she observed them, the more questions formed. Who were they? Where had they come from? Why did they behave more like young nobles than prisoners? Then one of the twins looked directly into her eyes. His expression remained calm, almost thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" Elara nodded. "Of course." The boy hesitated, then quietly asked, "Why do kings allow chains?" The question hit her harder than expected. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Around them, the prison remained silent. The lantern light flickered softly against stone walls. Yet everything seemed to disappear except those 5 words. Why do kings allow chains? Elara opened her mouth. No answer came. Because she didn't know. Or perhaps because every possible answer felt wrong. Eventually she lowered her eyes. I wish I knew. The boy studied her face. Then nodded slowly. As if he already understood the truth. As if disappointment was something he had learned long ago. Before leaving, Elara placed extra bread beside the twins. The younger child stirred in his sleep. One twin carefully adjusted a blanket around him. Such a simple gesture. Yet it revealed everything about them. Even here. Even in chains. They protected others. As Elara turned to leave, one of the boys spoke quietly. Thank you. She looked back. For the first time since entering the prison, she saw a small smile. Not large. Not dramatic. Just genuine. A tiny spark of kindness surviving inside a terrible place. As she climbed the stairs back toward the surface, that smile stayed with her. So did the question. Why do kings allow chains? And deep inside, Elara knew something dangerous. She could no longer pretend this wasn't her problem. Because somewhere beneath Moonfall, innocent children were waiting for someone to fight for them. And she was beginning to realize that someone might have to be her. Far above the sleeping city, Alpha King Kael stood alone on a stone balcony overlooking Moonfall. The rain had finally stopped. Clouds drifted slowly across the night sky, revealing pieces of the moon hidden behind them. Below, thousands of lights flickered throughout the kingdom he ruled. A kingdom that believed he had everything. Power, respect, authority, strength. Yet none of those things could silence the emptiness that followed him every day. Kael rested both hands on the cold stone railing. The wind tugged gently at his dark cloak. For a moment he closed his eyes. And immediately the memories returned. Not of battles. Not of victories. But of loss. Years ago, before the crown felt like a burden, he had known happiness. He had known love. His mate had stood beside him through every challenge. She had been his peace during war. His strength during uncertainty. Then came the uprising. A rebellion fueled by greed and ambition. The kingdom survived. She did not. The pain never truly left him. Time had taught him how to hide it. Nothing more. Since then, Kael had ruled through duty rather than hope. Every decision felt like another sacrifice. Every victory felt incomplete. And now the council demanded another sacrifice. Marriage. Not for love. Not for fate. For politics. His conversation with Serena earlier that day replayed in his mind. She was intelligent, ambitious. Her family controlled territory the kingdom desperately needed. A union between them would prevent conflict. Made sense. That was the problem. It only made sense. There was no feeling behind it. No connection. No future he actually wanted. Only responsibility. Kael exhaled slowly. Then something unexpected entered his thoughts. Elara. The healer. He frowned slightly. Why was he thinking about her? He barely knew her. Yet he couldn't forget the brief glimpse of disappointment he had seen on her face earlier in the corridor. It had lasted only a second. But somehow it stayed with him. Something about her quiet sadness unsettled him. Perhaps because she never complained. Never demanded attention. She simply worked, helped people, and disappeared back into the background. Unlike most people surrounding the throne. A knock interrupted his thoughts. One of his advisors entered carrying several reports. Your Majesty. The council requests your review of the trader permits. Kael accepted the documents. His expression darkened as he read them. Slave trade profits. Transportation routes. Economic benefits. Cold numbers attached to human suffering. Several council members supported expanding the practice. The argument disgusted him. Yet eliminating it immediately could trigger rebellion among powerful noble houses. Again he found himself trapped. A king powerful enough to command armies. yet unable to freely do what he knew was right. As the advisor departed, Kael stared out across Moonfall once more. The kingdom looked peaceful from above. But beneath that peace, cracks were forming. And somewhere in the city, forces were already moving that would soon change everything. Though Kael did not know it yet, destiny had already begun guiding him toward a healer who refused to ignore suffering. And toward a future neither of them could imagine. The question refused to leave Elara's mind. Why do kings allow chains? For 2 days it followed her everywhere. While treating patients, while preparing medicines, while walking through the crowded streets of Moonfall. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces from the underground prison. The frightened children, the exhausted mothers, the twin boys who spoke with wisdom far beyond their years. And the more she thought about them, the more unbearable the silence became. The kingdom continued as if nothing was wrong. Merchants filled the marketplace. Nobles attended banquets. Council members discussed trade and politics. Meanwhile, innocent people sat behind iron bars beneath the city, waiting for someone to care, waiting for someone to act. Elara finally realized she could no longer wait, because every day she delayed meant more suffering, more children sold, more families separated, more lives destroyed. That night, Moonfall slept beneath a moonless sky. Dark clouds covered the stars. The city seemed quieter than usual, almost as if the world itself was holding its breath. Elara moved through the shadows wearing a dark cloak. A small satchel hung at her side. Inside were medicine bottles, lockpicks borrowed from an old friend, and several flasks filled with oil. Her heart pounded with every step. Fear whispered warnings into her mind. She was caught, she could lose everything. Her position, her freedom, possibly even her life. But another voice was louder. The voice of that little girl asking for water. The voice of the twin boy asking why kings allowed chains. Those voices pushed her forward. Soon she reached the trader camp outside the Western District. Several transport wagons stood ready for departure at sunrise. Guards sat around campfires laughing and drinking. None expected trouble. After all, everything they did was legal. That confidence became their weakness. Elara slipped between stacks of cargo crates. Careful, silent, patient. The smell of smoke filled the air. Lantern light flickered across muddy ground. She waited until 2 guards wandered away from the nearest cage. Then she moved, quickly. Her fingers trembled as she inserted the lockpick. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Blick. The lock opened. Inside, frightened captives stared at her in confusion. Elara pressed a finger to her lips. Quiet. No one moved. No one seemed to believe what was happening. Then she whispered, "You're leaving. Now." Suddenly everything changed. Hope flashed across exhausted faces. People began slipping from cages. Women gathered children. Older prisoners helped the weak stand. The impossible was becoming real. Freedom. Elara moved from one cage to another, unlocking, freeing, guiding. Every second increased the risk. Every second brought discovery closer. Then she reached the twins. The identical boys were already awake, watching, waiting, as if they had expected this moment. When the lock opened, neither rushed forward. Instead, they immediately helped the younger child between them, protecting him before themselves. Again that strange maturity. Again that unusual discipline. "Stay close to me," Elara whispered. The twins nodded. No questions, no panic, only understanding. Soon dozens of captives were moving through the darkness toward the nearby forest. Everything was working. Until a shout shattered the night. "Hey!" A guard stood near the central fire. His eyes widened. For one brief second, silence covered the camp. Then chaos exploded. Alarms rang. Guards grabbed weapons. Prisoners screamed. The escape had been discovered. Fear surged through Elara. But there was no turning back now. She pulled one of the oil flasks from her satchel. Her gaze landed on the largest transport wagon. The same kind of wagon that carried children across kingdoms in chains. A symbol of everything wrong with Moonfall. Everything she hated. Everything she refused to accept. Without hesitation, she smashed the flask against the wood. Oil spread instantly. Then she grabbed a burning torch from a nearby stand. For a moment she simply stared at the wagon. The chains hanging from its sides rattled softly in the wind. Then she threw the torch. Fire erupted. Flames raced across the wood. Heat exploded into the darkness. The wagon became an inferno. Guards shouted in panic. Horses screamed. Smoke filled the sky. The burning wagon illuminated the entire camp. For Elara it meant more than destruction. It was a message. Declaration. A rejection of fear. A rejection of injustice. A statement that some laws deserve to burn. The captives seized the opportunity. With guards distracted by fire, dozens escaped toward the forest. Elara gathered the children. Run! Nobody needed to be told twice. Feet pounded against wet earth. Branches snapped beneath hurried steps. Behind them, the camp descended deeper into chaos. Yet something unexpected happened. The twin boys never left her side. While other children panicked, the twins remained focused. One helped younger captives navigate rough terrain. The other guided people toward safer paths through the woods. It was as if they had rehearsed survival their entire lives. Far too mature. Far too capable. Far too different. The mystery surrounding them deepened with every passing minute. Eventually the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. The forest swallowed the escaping group. Moonlight filtered through trees. Cold air filled their lungs. They were exhausted, terrified, uncertain what would happen next. But they were free. Least for now. Elara stopped beside a narrow stream and looked back. In the distance, orange flames still rose into the night sky. The burning wagon remained visible even from here. A beacon against darkness. A reminder of the choice she had made. There was no returning to her old life now. No pretending nothing had happened. No hiding from consequences. For the first time since overhearing Kael's promise to Serena, something felt different inside her. Not happiness. Not yet. Something stronger. Purpose. Behind her, the freed children gathered together. Frightened but hopeful. And among them, the mysterious twin boys watched the flames with unreadable expressions. As if they understood that tonight was only the beginning. And as Elara turned toward the deeper forest, she had no idea that she was walking beside the future heirs of Moonfall itself. A secret powerful enough to shake an entire kingdom. The first light of dawn crept across the forest as Elara led the exhausted children toward an abandoned temple hidden deep among ancient trees. The stone structure had long been forgotten by the kingdom. Moss covered its walls. Vines crawled across broken pillars. Yet for the frightened children, it felt safer than anywhere else in the world. Inside, Elara distributed the little food she had managed to carry during their escape. Most of the children fell asleep almost immediately. Exhaustion had finally overcome fear. The twin boys remained awake, silent, watching the growing sunlight filter through cracks in the ceiling. Eventually, one of them looked toward Elara. "You deserve to know who we are." The seriousness in his voice immediately caught her attention. The second twin took a slow breath. Then he spoke words that changed everything. "We are the sons of Alpha King Kael." For a moment, Elara thought she had misheard. The boys calmly explained that years ago, after an assassination attempt against the royal family, a trusted noble betrayed them. Instead of protecting the young heirs, he secretly sold them into slavery to erase their claim to the throne forever. Suddenly everything made sense. Their discipline, their intelligence, the way they carried themselves. These were not ordinary children. These were Moonfall's lost heirs. The future of the kingdom. Elara felt a wave of shock wash over her. She had unknowingly rescued the Alpha King's sons. One of the twins lowered his gaze. "We told people before. Nobody believed us. The quiet sadness in his voice broke her heart. Nobody had listened. Nobody had cared. Except her. A few minutes later, one of the boys fell asleep while holding her hand. As Elara looked down at him, she understood something with absolute certainty. No matter who came searching, no matter what danger followed, she would protect them. Moonfall awakened to chaos. Before sunrise, messengers were already racing through the palace corridors. Guards hurried between towers. Council members demanded emergency meetings. The entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath as rumors spread from street to street. A slave camp had burned during the night. Dozens of captives had escaped, and someone had helped them. Inside the royal war chamber, Alpha King Kael stood at the center of a large stone table covered with reports. His expression remained calm. But beneath that calm, a storm was building. A commander stepped forward and placed another document before him. The traders identified several of the missing prisoners, Your Majesty. Kael glanced at the report. Then his eyes froze. For years, he had lived with a painful truth. His twin sons were dead. Or at least, that was what he had been told. The official records had always insisted there were no survivors after the attack that stole them from him. Now new evidence suggested otherwise. Witnesses from the camp claimed two identical boys matching the heirs' descriptions had escaped during the fire. For a moment Kael could not speak. Hope and grief collided inside him. His sons, alive. The possibility alone was enough to shake him. Years of buried pain suddenly surfaced. Memories he had spent a decade suppressing returned all at once. Tiny hands. Childish laughter. The last time he had held them. His jaw tightened. If they were truly alive, someone had lied to him. Someone had hidden the truth for years. A dangerous silence settled over the room. Then another name appeared in the report. Elara. Several witnesses claimed the healer had led the escape. Immediately, council members began talking over one another. She committed treason. She attacked legal property. She must be arrested immediately. The accusations came quickly. Too quickly. Kael listened without speaking. Something about it felt wrong. Elara was many things. Stubborn. Compassionate. Fearlessly kind. But a traitor. The word didn't fit. Still, facts remained facts. She had disappeared. The prisoners had vanished. And somehow his sons were connected to the escape. The council demanded punishment. Kael raised one hand. Instant silence filled the chamber. No arrests. Several nobles looked shocked. One councilman stepped forward. Your Majesty, she violated kingdom law. Kael's golden eyes settled on him. And yet I will hear her side before passing judgment. No one argued further. Few people challenged the Alpha King when he used that tone. As the meeting ended, Kael remained behind. His gaze drifted toward the window overlooking Moonfall. Somewhere beyond the city walls, answers waited. His sons. The healer. The truth. For reasons he couldn't explain, concern for Elara continued to linger in his thoughts. The feeling made no sense. Yet it refused to disappear. Hours later, Kael strapped a sword across his back and prepared his horse. This would not be delegated. This would not be left to soldiers. If his children were truly alive, he would find them himself, not as a king, not as a ruler, but as a father. And as he rode through the palace gates with a small search party behind him, he had no idea that every step was bringing him closer to a woman destined to change his life forever. For 3 days, Elara and the children remained hidden. Deep within the northern forests stood an ancient sanctuary that few people remembered. Long ago it had been a place of learning. Scholars had once traveled from distant territories to study within its walls. Now it stood forgotten, quiet, peaceful. The sanctuary's library became their refuge. Tall wooden shelves stretched toward the ceiling. Hundreds of old books gathered dust beneath soft golden light filtering through stained glass windows. For the first time since escaping Moonfall, nobody was running. Nobody was hiding from guards. Nobody was listening for chains. The silence felt strange. But slowly it began to heal them. Elara spent her mornings treating injuries. Several children suffered from bruises and old wounds. Others carried scars that medicine could not reach. Fear, loneliness, memories. She listened more than she spoke. Sometimes that was the greatest kindness she could offer. One evening, she found the younger children gathered around a fireplace. The twin boys sat among them. To her surprise, they were smiling. Actual smiles. Not forced. Not cautious. Real. The sight warmed something inside her chest. For so long, survival had been their only goal. Now they were beginning to remember how to be children. Elara pulled an old storybook from a nearby shelf. The cover was faded with age. "Would you like a story?" she asked. The younger children immediately nodded. Even the twins seemed interested. Soon the room filled with the sound of her voice. Ancient heroes. Lost kingdoms. Brave wolves who protected those weaker than themselves. The children listened closely. Some laughed. Some asked questions. For a little while, the darkness of the past seemed farther away. Later that night, after the younger children had fallen asleep, the twins remained awake beside the fire. The orange flames danced across their faces. One of them stared into the fire for a long moment, then quietly asked, "Do you think our father ever looked for us?" The question carried years of pain. Elara's heart ached. She moved closer. "I do." The twin looked uncertain. "But he never found us." "No," Elara said softly. "But that doesn't mean he stopped caring." The second twin lowered his gaze. "We tried telling people who we were." His voice cracked slightly. "Nobody believed us." The words revealed wounds deeper than any physical injury. Years of being ignored. Years of being forgotten. Elara reached out and gently squeezed his shoulder. "I believe you." The simple statement filled the room with silence. Neither boy spoke for several seconds. Because sometimes the thing people needed most was not rescue. It was belief. A little later, one twin asked another question. "If you had become queen someday, what would you have done?" Elara smiled sadly. She stared toward the dancing firelight. "I never wanted a crown." The boys looked surprised. "What did you want?" Her answer came without hesitation. "A place where people could live without fear." The twins exchanged a glance. Neither realized how important those words would become. And neither did Elara. Outside, the forest remained quiet beneath the stars. But far beyond the sanctuary walls, Alpha King Kael was drawing closer with every passing day. And soon, the peace they had found would be tested in ways none of them expected. The fourth morning at the sanctuary arrived wrapped in silver mist. Sunlight filtered through the towering trees, painting soft patterns across the ancient stone walls. Inside the library, most of the children were still asleep. For the first time in years, they felt safe enough to rest deeply. Elara sat beside the fireplace with a blanket draped over her shoulders. One of the younger children slept curled against her side. Nearby, the twin heirs sat reading one of the old books she had given them. The sanctuary felt peaceful. Almost too peaceful. As if the world outside had temporarily forgotten they existed. But fate had not forgotten. Far beyond the forest, Alpha King Kael had followed every clue. Broken wagon tracks. Witness reports. Footprints left near the river crossing. Each sign had led him closer. And now he stood just beyond the sanctuary walls. Hidden among the trees. Watching. Kael had expected many things. Resistance. Fear. Perhaps even betrayal. Instead he found something he never imagined. The twins were alive. Healthy. Smiling. For several long seconds he couldn't move. He simply stared. One of his sons laughed quietly at something written in a book. The sound struck Kael harder than any blade. Years. He had lost years. Years of birthdays. Years of memories. Years he could never reclaim. His chest tightened painfully. Then his gaze shifted toward Elara. She sat surrounded by children who were not her responsibility. Children she owed nothing. Yet she cared for them as if they were her own family. One small girl stirred in her sleep. Without even looking up from her book, Elara gently adjusted the child's blanket. The simple gesture stopped Kael completely. No politics, no ambition, no desire for power. Just kindness, pure and effortless. For the first time in many years, something inside him softened. He remained hidden longer than he intended, simply watching, simply understanding. Then one of the twins suddenly looked toward the doorway. Their eyes widened. "Father!" The word shattered the silence. Elara's head snapped upward. The room immediately grew still. Kael stepped from the shadows. For a moment nobody spoke. The twins stared. Elara stared. Even the younger children sensed something important was happening. The Alpha King looked different than she remembered. Not distant. Not untouchable. Just tired. A man carrying years of grief. The twins moved first. They crossed the room cautiously, as if afraid he might disappear. Kael dropped to one knee. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "My sons." The words carried enough emotion to silence the entire room. Neither boy hesitated any longer. They threw their arms around him. Kael closed his eyes, holding them tightly, as though letting go would break him. Across the room, Elara quietly looked away. The reunion felt deeply personal. Yet when Kael finally lifted his gaze toward her, something shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just enough to be felt. For the first time he wasn't looking at a healer. And for the first time she wasn't looking at a king. Only two people standing on opposite sides of a room. Both carrying old wounds. Both understanding pain. Neither fully aware that destiny was already drawing them closer. And in the silence that followed, the foundation of something far deeper than friendship quietly began to grow. The return to Moonfall should have been a celebration. The lost heirs had been found. The Alpha King's sons were alive. The truth had finally surfaced after years of lies. But instead of celebration, the kingdom was greeted by tension, by fear, by betrayal. The moment Kael entered the capital with the twins beside him, rumors spread through every street and marketplace. Citizens gathered outside the palace gates. Whispers became conversations. Conversations became questions. And questions became dangerous. Who had hidden the heirs? Who had profited from their disappearance? Who had allowed children to be sold into slavery? Inside the royal council chamber, panic was already spreading. Several council members knew exactly what the return of the heirs meant. Their secrets were no longer safe. Their crimes could no longer remain buried. As Kael entered the chamber, silence immediately fell. The twin boys stood beside him. Elara remained a few steps behind. For the first time, she stood before the council without fear. She had spent years serving these people. Now she finally saw them clearly. The Alpha King placed a collection of recovered documents onto the council table. Records taken from the slave traders. Payments, signatures, proof. The evidence was undeniable. A senior councilman's face immediately lost color. Another refused to meet Kael's gaze. The room felt colder with every passing second. "You sold children," Kael said quietly. His calm voice was far more frightening than a shout. "You hid my heirs." No one answered. Because there was nothing left to deny. Then came another betrayal. Serena stepped forward. Elara's heart sank instantly. Part of her still hoped her sister would choose what was right. That hope lasted only seconds. "The kingdom needs stability," Serena said firmly. If difficult decisions were made, they were made for the greater good. The words struck harder than any insult. Because sometimes the thing people needed most was not rescue. It was belief. A little later, one twin asked another question. "If you had become queen someday, what would you have done?" Elara smiled sadly. She stared toward the dancing firelight. "I never wanted a crown." The boys looked surprised. "What did you want?" Her answer came without hesitation. A place where people could live without fear. The twins exchanged a glance. Neither realized how important those words would become. And neither did Elara. Outside, the forest remained quiet beneath the stars. But far beyond the sanctuary walls, Alpha King Kael was drawing closer with every passing day. And soon, the peace they had found would be tested in ways none of them expected. The fourth morning at the sanctuary arrived wrapped in silver mist. Sunlight filtered through the towering trees, painting soft patterns across the ancient stone walls. Inside the library, most of the children were still asleep. For the first time in years, they felt safe enough to rest deeply. Elara sat beside the fireplace with a blanket draped over her shoulders. One of the younger children slept curled against her side. Nearby, the twin heirs sat reading one of the old books she had given them. The sanctuary felt peaceful, almost too peaceful, as if the world outside had temporarily forgotten they existed. But fate had not forgotten. Far beyond the forest, Alpha King Kael had followed every clue. Broken wagon tracks, witness reports, footprints left near the river crossing. Each sign had led him closer. And now he stood just beyond the sanctuary walls, hidden among the trees, watching. Kael had expected many things. Resistance, fear, perhaps even betrayal. Instead, he found something he never imagined. The twins were alive, healthy, smiling. For several long seconds, he couldn't move. He simply stared. One of his sons laughed quietly at something written in a book. The sound struck Kael harder than any blade. Years. He had lost years. Years of birthdays. Years of memories. Years he could never reclaim. His chest tightened painfully. Then his gaze shifted toward Elara. She sat surrounded by children who were not her responsibility. Children she owed nothing. Yet she cared for them as if they were her own family. One small girl stirred in her sleep. Without even looking up from her book, Elara gently adjusted the child's blanket. The simple gesture stopped Kael completely. No politics, no ambition, no desire for power. Just kindness, pure and effortless. For the first time in many years, something inside him softened. He remained hidden longer than he intended, simply watching, simply understanding. Then one of the twins suddenly looked toward the doorway. Their eyes widened. "Father!" The word shattered the silence. Elara's head snapped upward. The room immediately grew still. Kael stepped from the shadows. For a moment nobody spoke. The twins stared. Elara stared. Even the younger children sensed something important was happening. The Alpha King looked different than she remembered. Not distant. Not untouchable. Just tired. A man carrying years of grief. The twins moved first. They crossed the room cautiously, as if afraid he might disappear. Kael dropped to one knee. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "My sons." The words carried enough emotion to silence the entire room. Neither boy hesitated any longer. They threw their arms around him. Kael closed his eyes, holding them tightly, as though letting go would break him. Across the room, Elara quietly looked away. The reunion felt deeply personal. Yet when Kael finally lifted his gaze toward her, something shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just enough to be felt. For the first time he wasn't looking at a healer. And for the first time she wasn't looking at a king. Only two people standing on opposite sides of a room. Both carrying old wounds. Both understanding pain. Neither fully aware that destiny was already drawing them closer. And in the silence that followed, the foundation of something far deeper than friendship quietly began to grow. The return to Moonfall should have been a celebration. The lost heirs had been found. The Alpha King's sons were alive. The truth had finally surfaced after years of lies. But instead of celebration, the kingdom was greeted by tension, by fear, by betrayal. The moment Kael entered the capital with the twins beside him, rumors spread through every street and marketplace. Citizens gathered outside the palace gates. Whispers became conversations. Conversations became questions. And questions became dangerous. Who had hidden the heirs? Who had profited from their disappearance? Who had allowed children to be sold into slavery? Inside the royal council chamber, panic was already spreading. Several council members knew exactly what the return of the heirs meant. Their secrets were no longer safe. Their crimes could no longer remain buried. As Kael entered the chamber, silence immediately fell. The twin boys stood beside him. Elara remained a few steps behind. For the first time, she stood before the council without fear. She had spent years serving these people. Now she finally saw them clearly. The Alpha King placed a collection of recovered documents onto the council table. Records taken from the slave traders. Payments, signatures, proof. The evidence was undeniable. A senior councilman's face immediately lost color. Another refused to meet Kael's gaze. The room felt colder with every passing second. "You sold children," Kael said quietly. His calm voice was far more frightening than a shout. "You hid my heirs." No one answered. Because there was nothing left to deny. Then came another betrayal. Serena stepped forward. Elara's heart sank instantly. Part of her still hoped her sister would choose what was right. That hope lasted only seconds. "The kingdom needs stability," Serena said firmly. If difficult decisions were made, they were made for the greater good. The words struck harder than any insult. Elara stared at her in disbelief. Even now, even after everything, Serena still chose power, still chose ambition, still chose herself. For a brief moment, sadness washed through Elara. Not because she had lost her sister, but because she finally realized she never truly had her. The realization hurt, yet it also freed her. Years of seeking Serena's approval suddenly felt meaningless. She no longer needed it. She never had. Outside the palace, citizens learned the truth. News spread rapidly. The missing heirs, the slave trade, the corruption inside the council. Public support shifted almost overnight. People who had once remained silent began demanding justice. For the first time, those responsible found themselves afraid. As the council's power began to crumble, Kael turned toward Elara. No words were necessary. They understood each other. Not as king and healer. Not yet as mates. But as allies. Two people who refused to look away when others chose silence. Together they had exposed a darkness hidden within Moonfall for years. And as angry voices echoed beyond the palace walls, one thing became clear. The battle for the kingdom's future had only just begun. But for the first time, hope stood on the winning side. Several days after the council's downfall, Moonfall finally grew quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, there were no emergencies demanding attention. No conspiracies. No arrests. No battles waiting to be fought. The kingdom was healing. And beneath a sky filled with stars, Kael and Elara found themselves alone. They walked through the palace gardens in comfortable silence. Moonlight painted silver patterns across the stone paths. A cool breeze moved gently through the flowers. Neither seemed eager to return inside. Eventually, Kael stopped near a small fountain. For a moment, he simply stared at the water. Then he spoke. "I spent years believing I had lost everything." His voice was low, honest. "The kingdom survived. But I never truly lived after that." Elara understood immediately. The pain in his eyes needed no explanation. She had seen grief before. Many times. But somehow, seeing it in him felt different. "You kept moving forward anyway," she said softly. Kael looked at her. "And so did you." The words settled between them. Warm. Meaningful. Real. Then something changed. Not around them. Within them. A strange feeling spread through the air. Quiet certainty. Recognition. As though two pieces of a forgotten story had finally found each other. Elara's breath caught. Kael felt it too. The mate bond. Not sudden. Not overwhelming. Simply undeniable. For several seconds neither spoke. Because the truth frightened them. Kael feared losing someone again. Elara feared becoming another political choice rather than a person. Yet when their eyes met beneath the moonlight, both understood something important. The bond had not appeared because they needed each other. It had appeared because they had already chosen each other through kindness, trust, and sacrifice. And that realization was far more powerful than destiny alone. The kingdom expected a celebration. After weeks of turmoil, corruption had been exposed. The guilty council members had been stripped of power. The slave trade routes were being dismantled. And for the first time in years, Moonfall looked toward the future with hope. Naturally, everyone assumed the next step was obvious. Elara would become Luna, the woman who saved the heirs. The woman who stood beside the Alpha King. The woman destined by the mate bond. Whispers filled the city long before any official announcement. Many believed she would eagerly accept the crown that Serena had spent years chasing. But they did not truly know Elara. Inside the royal council chamber, nobles, commanders, and village representatives gathered beneath towering banners of Moonfall. The room was filled with expectation. Kael sat upon the throne, calm and unreadable. The twin heirs stood proudly nearby. And Elara stood before them all. One of the senior advisors stepped forward. "Elara of Moonfall," he announced. "The kingdom recognizes your courage, your sacrifice, and your loyalty. The council formally offers you the position of Luna Queen." A murmur spread through the room. Everyone waited. Some smiled. Others nodded approvingly. It was the moment many believed she had always wanted. Elara looked around the chamber. She saw powerful people, ancient traditions, a throne many would sacrifice everything to reach. Yet surprisingly, she felt no excitement, no hunger, no desire, only clarity. Slowly she shook her head. The room instantly fell silent. Several nobles exchanged confused looks. Even Kael seemed slightly surprised. Elara took a deep breath. Then she spoke. "When I was younger, I thought being seen by powerful people would make me matter." Her voice remained steady. "But I was wrong." The silence deepened. "I spent years helping others because it was right, not because it earned rewards." She looked toward the gathered council. "A crown has value only if it serves people. Power without purpose means nothing." The words struck the room with unexpected force. No one interrupted. No one argued. Because everyone could hear the truth behind them. Elara wasn't refusing from fear. She wasn't refusing because she felt unworthy. She was refusing because her worth no longer depended on titles. For the first time in her life, she stood completely free. Not as Serena's forgotten sister. Not as the kingdom's healer. Not as a future queen. Simply as herself. Across the room, the twin heirs smiled. Kael watched her with quiet admiration. Because in that moment, Elara revealed the very reason she was worthy of everything she refused to chase. And as the chamber remained silent around her, one thing became clear. The woman who never sought power had become the person the kingdom trusted most. Not because of a crown, but because she had proven that character mattered more than any throne ever could. The sunrise ceremony took place 3 days later. Golden light spilled across the towers of Moonfall as thousands gathered in the palace square. Citizens filled the streets. Families stood shoulder to shoulder. Children sat upon their parents' shoulders to witness the moment history would remember. At the center of the square stood Elara. The same healer who had once walked these streets unnoticed. The same woman who had chosen compassion when others chose silence. As the morning sun climbed higher, Alpha King Kael stepped forward. The crowd grew quiet. No one knew exactly what he intended to say. Kael stopped before Elara. Then, to the shock of the entire kingdom, he lowered himself to one knee. Not as a ruler, not as an Alpha King, but as a man. His golden eyes never left hers. "You were never chosen because of politics," he said softly. "You were never needed because of alliances. And you were never valued for what you could give. Emotion tightened his voice. I love you because you remained kind when cruelty was easier. Because you protected children no one else would save. Because you reminded me what this kingdom should be. Tears filled Elara's eyes. Before she could answer, two familiar voices shouted happily. Mother! The twin heirs ran toward her without hesitation. The crowd laughed through their tears as the boys wrapped their arms around her. Something inside Elara finally broke free. Years of doubt. Years of loneliness. Years of feeling unseen. She looked at Kael and smiled. Then she accepted both his hand and the mate bond that had quietly connected them all along. As the sun rose over Moonfall, old slave chains were melted into a memorial honoring those who had suffered. And the kingdom learned a lesson it would never forget. A crown had not saved Moonfall. Kindness had. And the woman who was once invisible became the heart of an entire kingdom.